So from my side, my name is Antoinette van der Merwe. I'm the Senior Director for the Division of Learning and Teaching Enhancement at Stellenbosch University. And I would like to welcome you to the very first Learning and Teaching Assessment seminar for the year. It's really wonderful to actually have everybody in person here today. This is the first time since a very long time that we've actually been here in person. The previous seminars were all on Teams, so welcome to everybody. Apologies from Professor Duresh Ramjigurnath, who normally would have done this welcome, also to the speaker, that he cannot be here this afternoon, so I'm just doing the welcome on his behalf. These seminars are hosted by him, the Deputy Vice Chancellor Teaching and Learning, in collaboration with my division. And of course, this is the first of 4 seminars planned for this year, so watch out for the other invitations that will get into your inbox. The purpose of the seminars is to promote the scholarship of teaching, learning, assessment at Stellenbosch University, and of course, during these sessions, teaching, learning, assessment champions at SU, TAL fellows, teaching, learning, assessment awardees are then also invited to share their interest, to share their research with all of you. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Nicoline to just give some practical issues to take care of, and then Karen to introduce our speaker for today, Prof. Ashraf Kagee. Thanks, Nicoline.
Yes, good afternoon, colleagues. As Antoinette said, I'm Nicoline Herman from the Center for Teaching and Learning, and we at the Center for Teaching and Learning are responsible for organizing these seminars 4 times a year. So Karen in specific, she is taking the lead here with organizing this. So from my side, I would like to give you some practical arrangements. So there's food. If you want to eat now or afterwards, please feel free. There is an attendance register that's going around. If you can just sign in, please. And then there's also feedback forms. If you could complete those for us at the end of the session, we would really appreciate it. As we always use that to inform what we do. So you see, we also have somebody here that's recording this session. So it will then be made available on the CTL website and maybe also on the division website, on Antoinette's website, for us then to revisit, but also for you to share with people who couldn't make today, because we know that some people might be busy somewhere else. Even if they wanted to be here, they just couldn't be. So we will make that available, and it will probably be within the next week or 2. It will be available on our website. Usually we have a Q&A at the end of the presentation, but I think our presenter today would also like us to engage with him while he's busy presenting. So please, Ashraf will indicate to us how we would like to proceed with that. So please feel free then to also engage with him. And on that point, it's then my privilege to introduce you to the topic of today that you also see there on the screen. And obviously that was part of what drew you here today to engage in this session, Infusing Research-mindedness in a Psychology Honours Module. So Prof. Kagee is from psychology, and he's been teaching research methods modules for undergrad and postgrad students since 2003. But during this teaching, he has encountered various barriers to the teaching of these modules. And some of these were mentioned in the blurb already. So some students do not understand the need to learn research methods. Some are dismayed at having to take compulsory modules in research methods. For some, scientific thinking is inappropriately applied to psychology. And there is also some skepticism about whether psychological experiences can and should be measured. And methodology and ideology are seen to coincide by some students and academics. So Ashraf then undertook a teaching advancement fellowship where he researched this specific topic, looking at the barriers that he could then address while teaching this. And we are then looking forward to listening to how he negotiated these barriers and as identified and bring into focus how technical knowledge of research methods can be applied in service of a greater social good. So we are privileged to have you here, Ashraf, and to learn from your knowledge. And I hand over to Karen then to introduce you. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, colleagues. It is my honor and privilege to introduce Professor Ashraf Kagee to you. He's a distinguished professor in the Department of Psychology in the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. He is also co-director of the Alan Fletcher Center for Public Mental Health and a member of the Academy of Science of South Africa. He has more than 200 academic publications and is rated as an internationally acclaimed researcher with the National Research Foundation. He received the Rector's Awards for Excellence in Research in 2006, in Teaching in 2007, and in Community Interaction in 2009. In 2018, he received the Chancellor's Award for Sustained Excellent Career Performance. And in 2021, he received an SU Teaching Excellence Award in the Distinguished Teacher category. Professor Kagee's research has focused on common mental disorders among persons living with HIV, psychological and structural factors influencing adherence to antiretroviral therapy, and common mental disorders in various populations. He teaches cognitive psychotherapy and research methods in the Department of Psychology. He chairs the Board of Trustees of the Trauma Center for Survivors of Violence and Torture in Cape Town, and he does capacity building work at the Gaza Community Mental Health Center in Gaza, Palestine. As a recipient of several SOTL grants, Professor Kagee has also conducted research on teaching research methods in psychology, an area where he focuses on critical thinking, skepticism, and empirical mindedness. He completed a TAU, Teaching Advancement at University Fellowship in 2022, focusing on the topic he's going to address today, infusing research-mindedness in a psychology honours module. Ashraf, over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Karine. Thank you, colleagues, for inviting me here. I wonder, though, if you guys know more about teaching and learning than I do, and I'm a little bit intimidated by this crowd, but I hope you'll be gentle with me when I share some of my thoughts on teaching and learning in the context of psychology. So this really came about some years ago when I was teaching research methodology at undergraduate level, and students started talking to me about, why do we need to know this? This is not psychology. This is, something else. And it's boring, and it's not interesting, and it's tedious, and we don't see the relevance. And so it became a challenge for me to think about ways in which one can make methodology of interest firstly, and I would say fun as well, but also how it links to the broader overarching mission and vision of the university, of what we do in higher education. And so my thought is that research-mindedness is an important aspect of how we need to think about training psychology students and making it part of their undergraduate experience. So just to say something about TAU, I was given the opportunity to do this teaching advancement at University's Fellowship, and I actually was able to hang out with a whole bunch of interesting people like Jeff Jarvis and others, and the idea was to give people, academics, senior academics, mid-level academics, the opportunity to engage with the broader issues in higher education, and to think a little bit more deeply about our role as change agents in the higher education context, but also specifically to work on a project, to work on a specific project, an individual project and a group project. The group project ended up being a digital artifact that I did it was a video that we made. I was working with a medical doctor, an historian, and people from a whole range of disciplines, which is one of the benefits of this TAU experience. But it's the individual project that I want to talk about today, because that pertains to what goes on in the Department of Psychology and what happens at this university. So I think Nicolene mentioned some of the barriers that I have been noting over the last few years. That the idea of measuring psychological phenomena is a problem. And from my point of view, if a psychological phenomenon exists, then it should exist in some amount. And if it exists in some amount, we should be able to measure it. And this is the field of psychometrics. And so we can track, for example, if we are intervening with patients who have a mental health condition and they have elevated symptoms on a measure, we can follow them over time and track their progress and look at the ways in which their psychological symptoms are being ameliorated. So if you think about a graph where the line goes down as an indicator of therapeutic success. So from where I'm coming from, measuring is a good thing. But then the counter view then is that, yes, but human experience is special, it's unique, it's to measure something is to do violence to it, and we mustn't do that, which is not really the point of view that I hold. The other issue that I encountered was that among many students and even some academics, when people read something in a book or a journal, it must be true, right? It must be true, and it cannot be debated with. And this is one of the things that I want to take issue with, because for me, the journals are a terrain, an arena of debate and discussion, right? And doing a post-publication review, reading a paper and picking apart the flaws in the design, the flaws in the way it's carried out, is part of what we need to train not only students but also some academics to have a skeptical gaze about what they read. And I call it a healthy disrespect for the written word. And that includes my own work, to be quite frank. And I tell students that suspicion of authority is a good thing. And suspicion of authority, including the lecturer standing in front of you, in other words, myself. Interrogate the claims that people make and to sift through the evidence to be able to arrive at conclusions about their veracity, etc. Okay, that is apart from the fact that a lot of the students in arts and social sciences are numerophobic. When they see a graph or a table, they get a big skirk, and they said, well, we want to do history and philosophy and psychology, for psychoanalytic psychology. We didn't sign up for numbers and graphs and tables and confidence intervals, and so they don't necessarily appreciate it. So this TAO intervention was to look at the 771 research methods module. So I've actually in the past, I don't any longer, but in the past I've taught undergraduate research methods. And those were the days when I had to teach in English and Afrikaans. How do you say stratified random sampling in Afrikaans? Gestratifiseerde ewekansige steekproeftrekking. I had to know all of the terms, and I spoke the terms, and I wrote it on the board, and etc. This was, 15 years ago or so. I don't teach that at undergraduate level, but I do teach the honors module. And so the students have their undergraduate degrees, they come into honors, and many of them couldn't care less about research methods, to be quite frank. What almost all of them want to do is apply for the clinical master's program, because that is a ticket to a profession, and I would say a fairly well-paid profession. So a clinical psychologist these days charge patients 1,000 Rand an hour or more. And so that's what they want to be doing. And all they care about is getting high marks, so that, because we only select people with the highest marks for the clinical psychology master's program, and that's what they want. So the odds are stacked against the lecturer who's trying to teach research methods, trying to show its relevance, its importance, and its applicability in the context of behavioral science and in the context of social science more generally, and to show its social relevance. So that was the challenge. That has been the challenge, and every year, we have the same kinds of conversations. So before 2020, it was business as usual. I was standing up and teaching and trying to make jokes and get people to laugh and this and that and the other. But then COVID came and everything changed, because I wasn't able to be in the class with the students. And so so this was in March 2020. I had some physical contact with him, and then we went into lockdown. And then the next year was also online. And I was forced to learn Sunlearn. I was forced to operate it and become good at it. And some of the people in the room I might have pestered a lot when I ran into trouble with Sunlearn. But anyway, it was a good thing, because when we got back to class, I had, and it actually coincided with the TAO program, because the TAO program, under the leadership of Jeff and others, I wanted to make this part of my learning as part of the fellowship of TAO. So there was a lot more involvement of students in the process, and I had prepared a whole range of materials, PowerPoint presentations with voiceover, that I put on Sunlearn, so that I wouldn't necessarily have to stand up and teach. I could engage in a conversation. I could be a facilitator of learning, rather than standing there and flipping slides. Because, I mean, it's pretty boring, right? Even though I'm flipping slides now, but I mean, anybody can flip slides and read what's on the slide. That, I don't think you want to get beyond that in the process of teaching and learning. So I put all the PowerPoint things online and used the classroom discussion for student presentations and my own facilitation of a conversation. And that conversation, I think, was where the shift kind of happened. The combination of the contribution of the students and my own facilitation of the process. Okay, so we try to get creative, right? And try to do drama and a courtroom kind of engagement, and we've modeled a focus group and how to do a qualitative interview. There were some PowerPoints, I mean, you can't get away from that. The short video clips, a skit. There was one, there was like a trial where there was a defense and a prosecuting, you know, etc. So creative ways of talking about methodology that the students actually came up with, because they were required to do a 10-minute presentation. We have a 2-hour session, so the 10-minute presentation then is a springboard to the conversation that we have, and it's guided by myself. It is related to the syllabus and the curriculum, etc. But sometimes it did go off tangent, and I'll talk a little bit about that and some of the discomfort that students had when that happened. Okay, so Sunlearn, what I also did was there's specific skills that students needed to learn as part of this module, including how to conduct a qualitative interview. They needed to transcribe it, and then in previous years, what I do is bring into class a transcript of an interview that I had conducted, and I'd bring in, and everybody would get a copy, and I'd bring in sheets of newsprint and pairs of scissors and a highlighter and Prit. And for people who have done qualitative coding, I don't know, these days we do it with Atlas TI, right? But Atlas TI is actually a tool. The actual coding and thematic analysis is done with the human brain. It's not the computer that does this. And so you can actually do it with these materials that I've just mentioned, and so the students had to kind of go back to kindergarten and start cutting and using a highlighter and Prit, etc., to arrange the codes into themes and families, etc. So we didn't do that any longer in the project. What I did was I showed the students how to do this by making video clips of myself doing it. And these video clips I had made during COVID, and now the video clips are available on Sunlearn, so that they can watch it and look at it themselves and conduct the data analysis for their project, for the 771 honors module, by watching the video. And then in class, we talk about the problems, the concerns, the issues that came up, how to brainstorm, how to problem solve, how to troubleshoot these kinds of things. Because a lot of the time, the concerns and problems that came up would not pertain to only one student. It would be a ubiquitous phenomenon, at least for several others. And so these video clips are placed on Sunlearn. They look at it, they try it out on their own, and they come to class and they talk about it. Various issues came up in class, and I had a list of them, but I took them away because I wasn't sure if I had the time. But for example, there was this case some years ago of a couple of social workers who were treating a child who had conduct disorder. The child wasn't able to behave, and the child would scream and shout, etc. And the social workers felt that it was a problem of birthing. The child hadn't been birthed properly, and so they wanted to engage in a rebirthing process. So what they did was they wrapped the child up in I think it was a carpet or something, and they compressed the child that way. And the idea was the child would scream and shout and simulate the birthing process and emerge from this rebirthed and without these conduct problems. It is theoretically implausible, empirically unvalidated, but guess what happened to the child? The child died. So these therapeutic techniques that people make up in their heads based on some random theory can potentially be hazardous and dangerous. So these kinds of things came up in the class. And the question is, to what extent do we implement things that are not based in science, that are not based in proper theory, that are not based in any kind of accepted behavioral theory, and what are the ethics of this? And so it came up in class. So I found a podcast, I put it on Sunlearn, and a few other similar kinds of things that came up. One is the idea that psychological interventions always are helpful. And the answer to that is no, that there are certain psychological interventions that are harmful. So we call these psychological interventions where people actually get worse, we call them iatrogenic interventions, iatrogenic treatments, where the doctor actually makes the patient worse. And there's evidence to show that in certain instances this can happen. I'll talk a little bit more about it if there's time at the end. Anyway, these podcasts were found, and we put them on Sunlearn with a view to calling attention to dislodging the common assumptions people have about psychology, the common assumptions they have about psychological treatments, and the importance of a methodological conversation, calling attention to looking at the evidence for certain kinds of things, having the skills to be able to evaluate a randomized control trial, for example. Okay, so what ended up happening, I mean, it was successful and it wasn't successful. I think it was, on the whole, a good thing, but some students didn't like going off topic in class. They thought we need to stick to what the slides said, and I must repeat the slides that are on Sunlearn, which that wasn't quite my idea. The idea that we can have a conversation that goes off on a tangent and then comes back, some students weren't too happy with that. They wanted the same theme to be maintained between what was going on in class and what was going on Sunlearn. I needed to ensure, since it was now a conversation in the class, not Ashraf standing and telling people stuff, but eliciting a conversation and a debate and etc. I needed to make sure that everybody was heard in the class, because in any class of 40 students, you're going to get the talkers and the not talkers and some people in between, and you want the non-talkers to also chime in and participate in the conversation. What it did require was more responsibility on students to actually read the material, to watch the videos that I made, to view the PowerPoint slides, to listen to what I was saying on Sunlearn, and then come to class informed, equipped with some of the skills, understandings that they needed to have, so we can have a higher level conversation that is beyond the content, that is more about the debate, about methodology. And so some preparation was going to be important. Now, honors students, I think, are maybe a bit more motivated than undergraduate students, so it's a fair expectation that they will prepare. But sometimes they don't, and one has to deal with that. Okay, so then there were different needs of students. Some students liked to talk, others didn't. Some students didn't want to participate. They wanted the lecturer to tell them stuff. We all read Paulo Freire's book, right, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, about pouring knowledge into the student and how that's not the thing to do, and etc. So the participation was going to be an important thing, where students were required to ask questions, offer opinions, engage in debate. And I did build in an incentive for a few extra marks for people who were able to, who actually did that. So there was some incentive for them to do that. Some students were verbal, confident, engaging, and fluent in English, and others were not. And I found that those skills and abilities sometimes mapped onto race and class. Students whose first language is not English might be a little bit more hesitant to articulate themselves, etc. Students who come from environments where their voices haven't historically been heard, now they're required to give an opinion or come up with an idea. So that required a bit of skill in teasing out. And I'm not sure if I got it completely right, but that was kind of the idea. So the classroom conditions required me to manage the discussion and facilitate the discussion. So if things did go completely off on a tangent, you got to bring it back to like what the topic of discussion is. Tangents are okay for a little bit, but let's focus on methodology, right? And so so managing that process, I think, was an important thing. What I try to do is to show the relevance of research methodology with a social justice agenda. Talking about things that happen in the world today: forced migration, pandemic, social inequality, racism, gender politics. All of these things. The Colored Women's article that came out from Sports Sciences a few years ago. Firstly, it was racist, but how could this work be done at a prestigious university? What are the implications for methodologists to evaluate this? So the gaze with which scientists and researchers approach their work is not neutral. It's not politically innocent. It is infused with a worldview and a vantage point that we need to talk about and make plain, this notion of reflexivity. So looking at and reading published research, and reading published research with a critical eye, looking at who the participants are, how they were recruited, what methods of assessment, what tests were used, psychometric instruments that were used, what data analysis techniques were used, were they appropriate? So it's not only reading it for understanding, it's reading it with a critical eye, with a view to trying to identify where the flaws are, because there's no research study that is perfect. And so developing the intellectual skills to be able to evaluate methodological components of a research study. And to be quite frank, I gave students some of my own work to critique as well, with a view to promoting the idea that even their teacher is fallible, right? And this is the Popperian notion of falsification, that whatever claims to truth you have, it's temporary, that it can be dislodged by other data, by other information, etc. Okay. So there was a study that I had conducted, and it was a study where, in an ideal world, you're supposed to assign participants randomly to each group, and there was a treatment component, etc. And with this particular study, it was impossible to randomly assign people to groups. And so it was a non-random quasi-experiment. And that's a clear threat to validity. So that was one of the publications of mine that the students had to read and identify some of the flaws. Okay. So what I try to do is also expose students to some of the methodological debates in intervention studies, and to evaluate behavior change interventions that are aimed at ameliorating psychological difficulties. Let me tell you very quickly, time do we have? Yeah. There was this phenomenon in the 90s and 2000s. How much time do I have? 5 minutes. Okay, maybe in question time I'll talk about it. I'll talk about the phenomenon in the 80s and 90s. Okay, so I collected some data at the end of the year. I asked people to participate in the study, and it was approved by the ethics committee, just so we all know. But we only got 10 students to participate, and I had a student, Michael, who had done the module the previous year, and he was quite enthusiastic. And so I said, well, do you want to do the interviews? Because I didn't want to do them myself, because they might tell me what they think I want to hear. The 10 students who participated in the interview said they had a different perspective of research methods, a better appreciation for research methodology than they did prior to the module. And I think that's kind of what I was looking for, this kind of shift in attitude, which I think is a bit different from students memorizing information. It's a shift in consciousness, in worldview, in attitude. Critical thinking, that not taking claims at face value and appreciating that they need to be supported with empirical evidence. Because in psychology, everybody's got an opinion. You listen to Oprah and she's got an opinion, and you read the agony aunt in the newspaper and that's another opinion. So that's different from scientific psychology, from psychology as a scholarly pursuit. And for psychology as a scholarly pursuit, you need a specific approach. You need a scholarly engagement with material, with methodology, with research, etc. And so you need to know those skills. There was, in the context of the class conversation, there was a lot of debate and discussion, and the students came to understand the importance of acknowledging other perspectives, that one viewpoint is only one viewpoint, and in order to have a credible perspective, you need to present the evidence to support your claim. The class assignment was actually quite a significant component of the module, where they were actually supposed to identify a research question, which we workshopped in class, but then collect data, do a qualitative interview with someone, and then transcribe the interview, and then engage in the thematic analysis and produce a research report. And the appendices in the report would be the diagram that they do as a consequence of their analysis. The circles and the lines that go between the themes and the families, etc. That one, and then also a transcript of 10 minutes of the interview that they did, to make sure that they actually did it. So that was a big assignment that they needed to do. So they felt proud and confident that they were actually able to pull it off. And several students then approached me to do a master's, with a view to implementing some of the skills for the MA in psychology by thesis only. That's different to the clinical psychology master's. There was a new vocabulary being developed, I think, where students were able to engage with each other and with myself using the new vocabulary of research participants, of random assignment, of random selection of populations and samples and confidence intervals and regression analysis and thematic analysis, etc. So, okay. So these are some of the skills that they learned: how to ask a research question, how to do interviews, collect data, transcription skills, data analysis, appreciating methodology when reading an article, and stepping out of the comfort zone in class discussions and participating in presentations. And these are the things that I think caused this change in thinking: the materials, the assignment, the collaborative environment, the engaging nature of the class discussions. The lecturer doesn't just stand there and tell them things and read off PowerPoint. The videos, the PowerPoint presentations. The students did say when they were the ones doing the presentation, they learned the most. I think some of them might have spaced out when they were in the audience. But I mean, like, what are you going to do? So So when there was an interactive element, that was most useful. The voice over PowerPoint, I think, was quite important. I've spoken about the class assignment and the collaborative learning experience. What I found very useful, I mean, I've done many research studies over time.
That's fine.
And what I found useful, when something came up, I could reflect on an experience that I had, a problem I had in collecting data, in running an analysis, in obtaining funding so it became a real world phenomenon. It's not just an abstract thing that happens in the class that the students just need to get through in order to get on with their lives. It becomes part of something. They become part of something that they actually find interesting, and there's a lecturer standing in front of them who has some experience in doing this kind of work. And I mean, I also told them about occasions when I attacked other people's work. Some years ago, I wrote a paper in SAJP, the South African Journal of Psychology, where I scolded the whole profession for embracing evidence-free interventions, and I took special aim at the Psychological Society of South Africa. And then Leslie Swartz, my colleague, wrote a response to my article, and then I attacked him as well. And he's a great friend, so we don't mind that. But I shared that exchange with the students too. And I put those papers on Sunland so that they could see that if you disagree with people intellectually, it doesn't mean that you don't like them or you're not their friend, but that robust discussion and conversation is part of what it means to be a scholar and a researcher. Okay. I had some things on graduate attributes, but I don't have to speak about them. Maybe I'll stop now and invite questions or conversation.
Okay. Great. Wonderful. Thank you.
I'll go. Do I need to use the mic? Right. Okay, right. Thank you very much for this presentation. I must say, as I read the blurb, I could, all of the barriers that you mentioned resonated with my own experience of teaching an honours module in research methodology in the music department. I think, first of all, similar kinds of skepticisms about why should we actually do research when what we actually want to do is just perform. And I also encountered some of those ideological barriers that you mentioned. So I have many questions, but I'll start with just one, and maybe we can take up more if you have time afterwards. But the first one is class discussions and how you managed to actually get the students to do the preparatory reading or whatever it was that they needed to prepare, because I similarly share the concern with creating an engaging class discussion environment, and yet it's always difficult to practically figure out how do you incentivize students to keep up with the reading, to do it well, so that the class discussion can go beyond that content-based discussion and yet not create an enormous lot of work for yourself. At one point, my colleague and I who presented this module asked for short summaries or, for instance, for written responses to an article, but that created an enormous amount of reading for us. So I'd be very interested to hear how you actually managed this.
So I don't know if I succeeded completely, but there were a few things. One is I impressed upon them the importance of this work. Secondly, I didn't put too many things for them to read. Like 2 or 3 articles per week, I think, is what I put on there. And sometimes students will not do them, and there's no way to control that. I didn't give them a quiz or a test or anything like that. The assumption was that they would come to class with a view to participating verbally, and I did incentivize the verbal participation. So they got extra marks if they asked a question or give an opinion or reflected on the reading, etc. But I didn't do that in a very controlled way. When it came time to assign the marks, I remembered the students who spoke and those who didn't, because when you know students' names and you talk to them, you get to know them, and the silent ones, the quiet ones, they. But the other challenge is those quiet students to be able to elicit their contribution as well. And as I mentioned, students whose first language is not English or who don't feel at home at the university in the environment here, they need to be made to feel included. And that is a journey. I don't know if we've all got that right yet, but I think that is part of our goal, and we need to get there where all students feel that they have a voice and that their voice should be heard. That's kind of a broader issue, but it has resonance in the context of the class.
You're welcome. Thank you, Prof, for such an interesting talk. I too teach an honours module in research methods, and it's quite a new one, only developed last year for the first time, and I was quite happy to hear that a lot of the things that we are doing overlap with what you're doing. But my question is about, so you said at the beginning, students often struggle to see the relevance of this module to their degree. And I wondered if you had any thoughts about how this approach, might change their mind about how relevant it actually is. Yeah.
So can I tell a quick story? It's a little bit of a controversial matter, to be quite frank. In the 1990s, there was an article that was published in the American Psychologist. And the article was a meta-analysis. A meta-analysis is when you put together many different research studies and you look at the aggregate results of all of them together. So let's say you have 50 studies and each study has 100 participants. You've got that many research participants in the meta-analysis. And the authors set out to test the claim that childhood sexual abuse results in a psychological disturbance in adulthood. So in this meta-analysis, they got together all of these studies that had two groups of adults who reported child sexual abuse and adults who didn't, no child sexual abuse. And they looked at the aggregate differences between the two. And guess what they found? They found negligible differences in terms of psychological adjustment. Now, this is a very interesting thing, because this is what the science tells us. But our gut tells us this is a terrible ethical, moral problem. Right? So are these authors actually saying that child sexual abuse is good, is fine, is okay? Because that's how people misinterpreted the meta-analysis. And it became a big deal in the American Congress. There was a vote to cancel the paper in American Psychologist. Several right-wing commentators in the US took aim at psychology and said, look at this nonsense that these psychologists are doing. They're promoting child sexual abuse. There was an organization, the American Man-Boy Love Association. Make of it what you will. They said, can you see what we're doing is fine. It's not a problem. So it was hugely controversial. Now the question is, you need to be able to engage in scientific activity to do a meta-analysis. You must have the methodological skills. There was such a big outcry in the United States and elsewhere that the journal, the American Psychologist, was asked to have the paper reviewed again. It had already passed through peer review and was published. Have the paper reviewed again by the American Academy of Science. And so they said, can you please review this again to see if the science is right? The American Academy of Science says, no, we don't want to review it again. It's already been peer reviewed by the American Psychologist peer reviewers. It's published. There's no reason to do it. And there was an apology by the American Psychological Association for this article that was published because of this furor. So here we have the science, the data, the methods, and we have the political context. And the two clashed with each other. This is an example of the importance of methodology, of research, in order to say, these are the findings that we arrived at. It's not to say that we think it's a good thing to do. The fact that these are the findings doesn't make it right, doesn't make it morally good or ethically good, but this is what the data have to say, and we need to take this seriously. So, so being able to engage in these kinds of conversations in order to arrive at an understanding of the human condition that is not based on bias or only theory or assumptions that are untested, is how I want to approach this.
I was just wondering, so I have two questions. The one is like just a silly question. When you gave, I like that you gave your own work to the students to critique. Did it have your name on it?
Yes, it did.
Okay, and
so I made myself vulnerable.
And if you take your name off, do you think they'll be more honest and tear it apart even more, or?
I mean, I suppose that might have been the case, but I also wanted to model for students that the researcher is also fallible. You know, that I'm not standing here as some authority that should never be challenged. My argument is only as good as the argument itself, the theory and the data, you know. Just because I'm a professor doesn't make me right under all circumstances. And having that suspicion of authority, I mean, we all need to be suspicious of our politicians, right? They're a bunch of losers. And so, so just because someone's in a position doesn't mean that they automatically need to receive credibility.
No, thank you. I really enjoyed that. And then the other question I had is, what practical things you did apart from sharing your work with the students to get everyone to feel included, help the quieter students to have their voices heard?
So what I tried to do, and in fact did with almost everybody, was get their research question for their project, and we workshopped it in class. So that people start off with a research question that's not really going to work, you know, and you need to massage it into shape to be an answerable research question that you can actually investigate with a research study. And there people were quite keen to participate because they wanted the research question to be in good enough shape to drive their project. So.
Thanks. So at the moment, the research methodology module in music is an honours or a master's first year if you didn't do an honours degree module. So it's postgrad. We have been considering to include it as a final year or fourth year module, because we found that by the time that people arrive at postgrad studies, in order to get in for postgrad studies, you already need to have a research topic more or less. And by the time that we're through with 1 year of research methodology, I think many people's perspectives on what they could have worked on and what they might have worked on had they known had already changed. So we're seriously considering building it into the fourth year curriculum. However, I do find that teaching research methodology becomes very abstract if people are not actually busy with their own research. So there's a marked difference in attitude at the beginning of the year as opposed to the middle or towards the end of the year. So I was wondering whether I can draw on your experience of teaching it as an undergrad module as opposed to a postgrad module, about, on the one hand, mitigating how abstract it might seem if you're not actually busy with your own research project and encountering those problems firsthand, as opposed to having that foresight to be able to know what is a research question, what does a robust study look like, what are the possibilities in my field of different things that I might study, what methodologically speaking is possible. Thank you.
Yeah, so look, I do take your point that from a certain point of view it can be abstract and not entirely relevant to the lived experience of students who are going through the degree programs, but I tried to have a hook, and the hook was what is going on in society now, what are the claims being made, and how can we interrogate them. And what I wanted to tell you earlier on about this iatrogenic treatment, the American Red Cross for many years had promoted this intervention when there's a traumatic event, when there's a hurricane or a flood or a building collapses, etc., some a catastrophic event, that the survivors immediately have to talk about the experience, the cognitions, the feelings, the affect, the behaviors, what was going on for them. It's called critical incident stress debriefing, to debrief people immediately after the event with a view to offsetting future post-traumatic stress. So you intervene as a preventive thing to prevent post-traumatic stress from occurring in the future. So there are a bunch of studies, including a Cochrane review, which is a review that uses a meta-analytic technique, showing that the people who received a critical incident stress debriefing, their symptoms of traumatization, and these symptoms of traumatization include intrusive thoughts, avoidant behavior, nightmares, startle shock responses, physiologic hyperarousal, etc. The people who got the critical incident stress debriefing, their scores on measures of traumatization remain high. The people who got nothing, their symptoms went down. Right? So how can that be? A psychological intervention actually kept people distressed, and doing nothing got them better. So the assumption that we make is that psychological interventions are always good and useful, and for the most part that is true, but there are instances where that is not the case. And the theory behind the results that were found was that forcing people to talk about their thoughts and feelings immediately after a traumatic event disrupts the natural social support, family support structures that they can access. And having them discuss their psychological experiences immediately reinforces and keeps them having it. So the thinking these days is now not to do critical incident stress debriefing, rather do nothing and wait until those people who indeed have symptoms of traumatization require services. And 10 or 15% of people who have a traumatic event will require psychological treatment. So I think engaging in topical debates about issues that are currently going on, you don't have to necessarily do your own research study, but if you're interested in behavioral science or psychology in general, we can talk about the methodological implications of what there is to know.
Wonderful. I'm watching the time, because I know Ashraf has to go and teach at 2 o'clock and he still has to go by his office. So that's why I'm going to rudely interrupt you. Apologies, Ashraf. But yes, from my side, just in closing, thanks so much for sharing this afternoon. It was absolutely brilliant. And I think it's so good that you actually ended off with a slide and had it on there without even talking about it, because that's something that I really got while you were talking. So it's not just about research methodology, as difficult as it might be, the graphs and everything and how you effectively teach that, but it's also about much more than that. And that's the graduate attributes and the criticality and the questioning authority and engaging mind and all of that up there. So thank you so much for sharing that with us as well. Yes, and in conclusion, thank you very much, and also to the participants and all your brilliant questions this afternoon. In conclusion, I've got to remind you about the attendance register, the feedback form, the lots of food that's still left, so please have something to eat, and then also a blurb for our next one. Please come and join us on the 11th of May, where Dr. Albert Streever from the Faculty of Agri-Sciences will be focusing on entrepreneurship in the curriculum. So we're switching from research methodology to entrepreneurship. So please come and join us, and thanks for attending this afternoon. Thank you very much. Let's give another round of applause to Prof. Thanks. Brilliant.